This 4-part series is on calorie deficits. Do you think there's a difference between a calorie deficit if you are a practitioner following The Zone, the Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers, Ornish Diet? Do you think there's a difference between a calorie deficit following one of those programs as far as impact to metabolism, impact to muscle loss, as compared to part 2, which is going to be a calorie deficit, but when you eat keto? Hey, if you're in the keto Atkins low-carb space, do you believe that your deficit comes with protections that protect against A, muscle loss, and B, a drop in adaptive thermogenesis, which is that drop in our metabolism? Wouldn't you like to know? That's part 2. Part 3 is for those of you who, like me, fast. Do you intermittent fast or extended fast? Then you believe that you have some protection mechanisms that kick in as well, like growth hormone or IGF-1, that prevent a downturn in metabolism and or muscle loss, right? Don't you believe that? And yet I'm going to show you with the science that there really isn't as big a difference as we're led to believe in social media. Okay, I can't wait to show you the science. In fact, there's so much science. I got about 20 studies. I had to break it up into a 3-part series. And I'm going to finish with part 4, which is if you were in my boot camp, if you were in Coach Mike's boot camp, and Mike was your keto coach and your boot camp coach, and you followed his advice, what would that advice look like? How does Coach Mike think he has a plan for you that's going to prevent muscle loss and a downturn in metabolism? Hey team, Mike here at After 40 Fitness and after40fitness.ca. So the discussion today then is around muscle loss and your traditional calorie deficit. If there aren't those protective mechanisms like ketones, GH, and IGF-1, what can you expect? And I think if you've been around this space at all for any period of time, you know what the impact is. You know it's going to be a downturn in metabolism and muscle loss in any long-term calorie deficit. Well, let's get after it. Notice this one here. This study is my favorite study on this topic. It's a meta-analysis that looked at other studies. Preserving Healthy Muscle During Weight Loss is the title in the journal Nutrition from 2017. Preserving Healthy Muscle During Weight Loss. Perfect. We're going right for the jugular on this one. Weight loss, you'll notice, achieved through calorie-reduced diet decreases both fat and fat-free mass. So to set the stage, what we're talking about, it does clarify that and say, or lean body mass. So fat-free mass, just to clarify with you, let's be candid, that isn't only muscle. That refers to anything that's not fat. Well, that includes some water weight. That definitely includes liver, and I shouldn't say liver, but organ weight. I meant to say organ weight. It includes connective tissue, tendon and ligaments. So there's a lot of things that go on in fat-free mass. It's just that muscle is a big piece. It's a big component. In persons of normal weight, the contribution of fat-free mass loss often exceeds 35% of total weight loss. Let that sink in. When they look at these studies of long-term calorie deficits, and by long-term, I'm just talking about 3 months or more. Okay, if you're in a calorie deficit for more than 3 months, this is what you can expect. Often exceeds 35%. Meaning, think about it for a second. Let's be pragmatic. You lose 10 pounds on any other regimen, any other diet methodology. About 3.5 of it isn't fat. Kind of makes a caveat that in persons who are overweight or obese, fat-free mass contributes to only 20 to 30%. So there's a bit of a protective mechanism just by being overweight. By having an abundance of energy in your adipose fat stores, you're protected to some degree. So in future, we're going to set the stage right now of that a traditional calorie deficit creates between 20 and 30% fat-free mass loss. Now, you're going to hear me say muscle loss, but I can't tell you what percentage of the 20 to 30% is truly muscle. It's just it's a lot. Another comment, men tend to lose more than women. And especially after the initiation of a weight loss program. And this goes back to, again, women tend to hold, they tend to hold more fat. So because men naturally at the same weight will be a little bit leaner, we lose more. We are closer. We brought the number up to 35%. Women tend to bring it down into the 20 to 30, right? So that's important to know. Regular physical activity, especially resistance type training and higher than normal protein intake. That's a real problem. We don't get enough protein. In fact, there's a real battle going on right now that espouses protein as problematic. Okay, and that's a shame. So you'll notice that, and so resistance type training, we're going to come back to this. This is going to be relevant in all 4 parts of this series, how important it is to get exercise in. When people say, can I lose weight? Can I go on the keto, the Atkins, the low carb? Can I fast without exercising? And blows me away in social media how many people jump in and go, yeah, I lost 60 pounds without exercise. Yeah, I lost 35 pounds and I didn't exercise one day. As if that's a good thing. We should never, ever jump into a social media forum and say it's okay to lose weight and not exercise. By the time I'm done, I'm hoping that I see a whole lot more of, yeah, no one's coming to your house and making you work out, but why wouldn't you want to? Right? Healthy weight loss requires, I'm going to say it again, healthy weight loss requires exercise. Resistance type training is by far the best. HIIT comes right after it. Frankly, anything else doesn't do anything to prevent muscle loss. It doesn't. I got some evidence of that. Okay, so I think we kind of beat this to death. That we established the baseline for our future conversations is going to be that about 20 to 30% of any weight loss is fat-free mass. Study number 2 takes us back to 1991 to the Proceedings of the Nutrition Society and a meta-analysis they did of studies up until that point, about 20 of them, in the title Physiological Responses to Slimming. Hey, isn't that neat? Back then in 91, they called it slimming, any calorie-restricted diet, any type of a regimen to lose fat. Physiological responses. Excellent. Let's have a look. I'm going to read this to you. The creation of a negative energy balance, which is necessary for all slimming regimens. Necessary for all. I'm just going to be a little bit facetious here and say that you don't know anybody who's lost weight who didn't eat less. No one can eat more and lose weight. You can't eat more food, more calories, more energy, and lose weight. And it invokes a wide variety of different physiological outcomes, each of which is likely to be affected by a number of influencing variables. Good. It's a universal. The body will do this, but the impact, the breadth, and the depth of it is entirely based on your variables and what you bring to the table. The outcomes include energy-sparing adaptations. That is it. That's adaptive thermogenesis. Energy-sparing adaptations in the body to reduce the amount of calories you burn at rest and at play. Alterations in fat and lean body mass, altered energy substrate handling, changes in appetite, and then health-related outcomes. Fitness, glucose tolerance, etc., altered hormonal status, and altered fertility. I did a video on 10 signs, and I'll put the link down below, 10 signs that your calorie deficit is too severe. And I used a study that looked at women and their menstrual cycle. And they looked at these women over 3 different periods. And what they wanted to see was based on the amount of, they put them in groups of how much of a deficit they were in. Modest, middle ground, and severe. And then they went and had a look at the frequency and severity of their menstrual issues. Okay, so that's what we're talking about altered hormonal status. Okay, these are all the things the body does in response to a negative energy balance. The first statement, which can be made with some certainty, is that a decrease in energy expenditure is a universal response to calorie-restricted diets, to energy restriction. A decrease in energy expenditure, whether you like it or not, your body will compensate and reduce your energy expenditure. Notice, except when purposely counteracted by factors such as exercise. I'm going to leave out the drugs. I hope you're not doing any. But exercise. Exercise combats this. Healthy weight loss requires exercise. I'll say it again. Healthy weight loss requires exercise. Otherwise, we just talked about how much muscle is lost in a calorie-restricted diet only. Okay, I hope it's sinking in. This study from 1990 is one we're going to look at. And notice the BMR responded. Their drop in BMR, their energy conservation kicked in immediately and progressively. The decrease was proportionately greater than the decrease in body weight. Notice in this 8-week study, these women lost 4% of their body weight, but their BMR dropped by 15%. It'll become clear this is a common finding. It's not just common, it's universal. Now, this is a summary of the studies. I actually like this summary of about 21 studies that they looked at over time to see the drop in metabolic rate. Notice up the y-axis, change in resting metabolic rate. That's a percentage. And across the bottom, how long each of these studies was. Right? From as little as 1 week out to, I see one about 27 weeks. That's a good study. And yet you'll notice that with a couple of anomalies, every one of them dropped metabolism somewhere between 5 and 25%. So 5 to 25% means a calorie deficit. You should never be in a calorie deficit all by itself. Being in a calorie deficit and just a calorie deficit without exercise is a game you can't win. I promise you. Here's the study itself. Okay, let's look at this real quick. You'll see across the x-axis, across the bottom period on diet is in days versus the y-axis, which is 24-hour expenditure. Notice that on by the way, the study went out to 56 days with a week of refeeding at maintenance afterwards. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But notice the -1. On the day before the study began, they fed them their maintenance calories. You can see what maintenance looks like. And then notice on day one, by the way, these women were on 1,000 calories. 1,000 calories a day. So whatever their basal metabolic rate is, whatever their BMR was, 1,800, 1,900, 2,000, they immediately started this diet on day one, this calorie-restricted regimen at 1,000 calories. Now notice after one day, day one, all right, and that's why it's said that the downturn in their metabolism was immediate and progressive. Immediate meaning they lost 4.6% of their metabolism. Their calories dropped 4.6% on day one. Unbelievable. Notice after a week, 9%. And after the 8 full weeks, 56 days, 15%. Remember the study said that they had dropped 4% in body weight, but 15% of their metabolism. There it is right there. Now, what's interesting is that after that week of refeeding, so a week back up at maintenance, gave them a week at maintenance, and it's still, despite being at maintenance, 9%, 9.8, call it 10%. They were still in a deficit. Now, this is the problem with, by the way, this last week. The study went on to show that they put them back on their maintenance, which was no longer maintenance. Remember, they're down 15% when they began their maintenance week. So let's take someone, for example, a woman whose maintenance calories are 2,000. If you think about that for a second, by the time this study is done, she's dropped 15%. 15% of 2,000 is 300. So in week 9, in the recovery week, if they fed this woman 2,000 calories, guess what? She's going to put weight on. Because 1,700 is her new maintenance. 2,000 is now a 300 calorie surplus. Yeah, and it didn't even recover. Look at that. After a week, it's only up 5% to minus 10. That is the issue, my friends, with a calorie-restricted diet all by itself. Okay? I think we're going to move on then to study number 3. Study number 3 is called Metabolic Adaptation to Calorie Restriction and Subsequent Refeeding. This was in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition from 2015. All right, metabolic adaptation to calorie restriction and subsequent refeeding. But you're wondering, what does that mean? All right, so they first set the stage by saying that this term that we call adaptive thermogenesis. Okay, you're going to hear that a lot from me. I talk about adaptive thermogenesis all the time. AT for short. This is the reduction of resting energy expenditure, or in your BMR, to calorie restriction. And notice, adaptive thermogenesis attenuates. It impacts. It negatively impacts. It's deleterious. It hurts weight loss and favors weight regain. Okay, it is not your friend. It is your nemesis. Adaptive thermogenesis is something we would want to stop, if at all possible. Mitigate it at a minimum. All right, the design. 32 non-obese men, all right, so heavy but not obese, underwent sequential overfeeding. This is cool. So for the first week of the intervention, for the first week, 7 days, they overfed them by 50%. I'll use myself as an example, and you can do the math in your head for yourself. I eat about 3,000 calories a day. So for this entire first week, plus 50% means 1,500 more. So 4,500 calories for a week. Well, what do you think happened? They put some weight on. Then, calorie restriction for 3 weeks at half. Okay, again, for me, 3,000 calories cut in half is 1,500. This would suck. I'd hate to be in this team. 50% for 3 weeks. So 1,500 calories for me for 3 weeks straight. And then refeeding for 2 more weeks, again at plus 50%. Now, over the course of 6 weeks, guess what? Eucaloric, isocaloric, whatever you want to call that term, their calories were the same over the course of 6 weeks. So a week plus 50, 3 weeks of minus 50, 2 weeks of plus 50. Overall, isocaloric. But you would imagine they gained and lost. Let's have a look at the result. Changes in body weight were plus 1.8 kilograms in the first week, as you would expect. You can't eat 1,500 calories surplus. I can't, and not put on some weight. And by the way, for the Americans that are watching the video, the rest of the world gets this 1.8 kilograms, by the way. But for the Americans, just call it double. Call it 3.5, 3.6, something like that. Pounds in 1 week. Woo! Okay. By the way, this regimen had no exercise. This was pure diet, up and down, no exercise whatsoever. Then 3 weeks of calorie restriction resulted in minus 6 kilos, minus 12 pounds. Not bad. And then for the 2 weeks of refeeding again, plus 3.5 kilos, plus 7 pounds back. Now, here's the interesting part. Notice the calorie restriction reduced fat mass and fat-free mass by 115, call it 115 and 160 grams per day, respectively. Just get the difference in the values. 114 of fat, but 160. Now, whatever the percentage is, again, I'll do the math for the Americans. I'll show the calculation here of grams to ounces. It's 28 and change, but let's, for the sake of argument, call it 30 grams per ounce, meaning just about 4 ounces a day of fat loss, but more than 5 ounces a day. More than 5 ounces a day of fat-free or muscle loss. This sucks. I would love to see this intervention done again with the men exercising for those 3 weeks. That'd be so cool. I'd like to see the impact to how much they lost on fat-free mass, but they didn't. Now, let's look at some of the results. Calorie restriction also led to reductions in resting energy expenditure. Look at that, 266 calories is what they dropped their BMR by being in this deficit. Okay, so think about that for a second. If I'm in this group and all of a sudden I'm cutting my calories in half, now when I go back to eating maintenance, it's no longer 3,000, it's 2740. Okay, 2740 is my new BMR. I go back to 3,000. No wonder people regain. I go back to eating my normal menu, my normal diet of 3,000 calories a day, and I'm going to put weight on because I'm in a surplus. It's no longer. But by the way, we talk about. I mentioned that adaptive thermogenesis is this whole collage of mechanisms in the body that kick in to reduce your calories. Right? And adaptive thermogenesis is not just metabolism. Notice the other things that are impacted. Respiratory quotient minus 15%. That's not just an indicator of how well you use oxygen. That actually is an indicator of how well you're burning fat. Heart rate down 14%. Can you imagine? Heart rate drop. Blood pressure. There's a good one. Blood pressure dropped 7%. A whole bunch of other ones. Nervous system, plasma, leptin, insulin. Last one, testosterone dropped 11%. 3 weeks in a calorie deficit. Man, this is a kick in the nuts. Like, that sucks. Go on a 3-week deficit and you drop your testosterone by 11%. Screw that. Our fourth and last study today is in PLOS 1 from 2009. Metabolic and behavioral compensations in response to calorie restriction. Compensations in response to a dietary regimen. Implications for maintenance of weight loss. This study is so cool. The methodology is that 48 overweight individuals, overweight men and women, were randomized into 4 groups. This study was over 6 months, but they were in 4 groups. You're going to love the 4 groups. Oh, they're so cool. This was a really neat one. The control group ate 100%. Okay, whatever their calories was, again, using me as an example, 3,000 calories for 6 months just to provide a baseline. The second group, you'll notice, is 25% restriction, 25% caloric deficit. So again, do the math in your head for yourself, but for me, 3,000, 25% of that is 750. So that means for the entire 6 months, I am going to eat 2,250. Kind of cool, right? Number 3, group 3 was caloric restriction, but with exercise. Now, it's the same 25%. Oh my God, folks, if I'm going to give you a preview of what Coach Mike's going to tell you to do in part 4 of this series, listen to this. This is going to give it away right now. Caloric restriction plus exercise for a grand total of 25%, right? So it says caloric restriction was 12.5%, and then exercise made up the other 12.5%. Of the caloric deficit, calories burned. All right. So now my deficit is only about 350, 375, and I'm going to make up the other 375 via exercise. Well, I already know that's the winner. And then lastly, a low calorie diet group. I'm going to take a fourth of these people and just put them on 900 calories, and let's see what happens. Oof, that one sucks. I'd hate to be in that group. Okay, what do you think happened? Obviously, right? You're already guessing. Weight changes at month 6. Here we go. Actually, the control group lost a pound. Isn't that interesting? That just goes to show you the value of monitoring, of tracking, via just getting to eat at maintenance. These people, despite that, just the fact that they were tracking, right, meant that they made some better choices. Let's look at the next 2. Calorie restricted group lost 10.4 pounds. 10.4 pounds, not bad, right? Like that's damn good. But notice the calorie restricted plus exercise group did the same. And then lastly, 14 pounds down for the low calorie group. Okay, so let's just go ahead and call the middle 2 groups, the calorie deficit and the calorie deficit plus exercise, kind of sort of a wash, but there are some big differences coming. Here it comes. At month 3, absolute total daily energy expenditure was significantly reduced in the calorie restricted group. Look at that, 454 average calories per day. All right, a drop in their metabolic rate, 454 calories. I got to paint you a quick picture. So let's suppose for a second I was in that group. And so I've cut my calories for the sake of the 6 months for the intervention by 750 calories. What this says is that my basal metabolic rate, my total daily energy expenditure has dropped now from 3,000 by 454. It's just a hair over 2,500. So think for a second, if you were me and you go back to eating 3,000 calories, you're in a 454 calorie surplus. I cannot eat more than 2,500 calories now after this intervention, after this diet regimen. I can't eat more than 2,500 or I'm into a surplus. That is my new maintenance level is 2,550. Holy Hannah, that sucks. Okay. And then notice the low-calorie group did the same. It had a drop of minus 600. And the last couple of words are, but not in the CR plus EX. Obviously not in the controls. They ate as close to maintenance as they could get. But not in the calorie restricted plus exercise group. So I hope that's sinking in. Create your deficit via exercise, or at least 50% of your deficit via exercise, and you don't have this drop. You don't have a plummeting total daily energy expenditure. But for control and CR plus exercise, adjusted total daily energy expenditure was not changed at either month 3 or month 6. All right, so the clear takeaway on that, folks, I hope you're getting it. In fact, I'll just read you the conclusion is that calorie restriction results in metabolic adaptation and behavioral adaptation with decreased physical activity levels. But the key, the takeaway, if there was one, is don't let your deficit be more than 10, 12, 15% max. Look at that. The deficit of 25% resulted in a huge impact to their, via adaptive thermogenesis, to their total daily energy expenditure. Huge, 450 calories. And yet at 12% food deficit, and the other 12 via exercise, none. After 6 months, no deficit, no change. No change in their BMR, no change in the total daily energy expenditure. If your deficit is anything beyond, let's call it 15%, because at 25, look what the impact was. 20 is your absolute worst. I think you want to be in the 10 to 15. This study just proved it. 12 and a half, perfect. And then go create the other half via exercise. If there isn't a takeaway on that, folks, I don't know what is. If you stuck around to this point, I hope you just had an epiphany. So when someone jumps into a forum and says, I really like to lose weight. I need to lose some fat, but I don't want to exercise. The collective response shouldn't be, yeah, you don't need to exercise. No, you don't need to exercise. Go for a stroll, go walk, go chase your kids around the house with a pillow. No, stop it. Honestly, that's so silly. That's not thinking pragmatically, and I just gave you the proof. All right, you should not ever invite or advise someone to create their deficit completely from food. That is self-sabotage. That is a game you can't win. And yet I just proved to you in this study that creating your deficit half from calories and half from exercise, there is no metabolic downplay. I could lose all the weight I wanted to in that, go right back to 3,000 calories, and Bob's your uncle. Not put on any weight, I'm eating back at maintenance. Okay, think about that for yourself, and the next time you decide if you want to go to the gym or not and do some resistance training or some HIIT, give yourself a kick in the butt and go do it. Go burn 200 or 300 calories. God bless you. That's the way to do it. Okay, I think we beat this one to death. I think you're on board with me at this point that yes, a caloric deficit without exercise, silly, naive, not pragmatic. Don't do it. All right, now the question is, what if I add in keto? What if I add in fasting? On that note, we're going to talk about the keto regimen and how it relates to what we just talked about in a typical caloric deficit, and if there is truly some safeguards against how bad I just showed you it can be in nothing but a caloric deficit. Are you ready? All right, I'll be back in part 2, but thanks so much for your time. I'll see you in the next one.